We may know 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 15 years ago about people's preferences, what they like to do, what they like to eat, what movies they like to see, what they like to buy. But based on the legalization of, or lack of legalization with cannabis, we don't historically know about people's preferences, how they like to consume. So in doing so, with all of these different markets that are coming in, these different lanes and businesses that are coming into it, you want to be able to provide valuable opportunities for these consumers to enjoy different cannabis products through knowledge, through education, through actually the products themselves. And then once you get to a point, for us, which is very, very important, is understanding the importance of pivoting and seeing how things evolve, just like in any other business. Your thoughts where they were at a period of time when you launched a business constantly change, whether that holds true. So although for us, because we are ancillary, we view our business and our growth path based on what is the need? How can we make things work best for our consumer, for potential advertisers, enhancing our technology. And, the thoughts that have come in that we've learned a lot over the last couple of years as well is that, anytime you're getting involved, you want to get involved without a doubt from the legal perspective. Even if you think you're covered because you're ancillary and actually not touching the plant, more awareness into the industry has created more desire and interest to really understand the laws and the legalities of it. You can't just start a business, generate revenue, and deposit it into your bank and think everything's going to be great. You have to fully understand, what the path is in order to protect the hard working capital that you're investing in your own business.
That makes a lot of sense, and I'd like to continue on that theme. We talk about being in business for 3 years. I think your first fund is about 3 years old, right? I mean, that's an eternity in this industry. So when you look back as where you started and the pivots that you've made, and maybe you could each talk to this as well, when you made a decision to be in the cannabis arena, what are some of the things that took you by surprise, or some of the things that you didn't necessarily anticipate?
Early on, I think there was a lot of judgment. So you're not only, starting a business in general is very challenging.
Mm-hmm.
We all have great ideas. It's who's going to wake up that morning and actually go out and do it, And so the fact that we actually even got this off the ground and did it was pretty amazing, that took place. Then you've got friends and you've got family. Well, what are you doing? It's not legal. Are you a drug dealer now? Trying to sort of figure all of this thing out. And what I've seen over the last 3 years is month by month, quarter by quarter, year by year, all of a sudden it's like, what are you doing is turned to, wow, that's interesting. Oh, wow, there's a great opportunity out there. And so I think, outside of the business challenges that anyone faces in any industry, one of the biggest challenges is not necessarily having the full support of your family and friends being judged, because we looked at these opportunities early on. So from a timing perspective, it worked really well. Now, with obviously great law firms and legal help and, venture capital and private equity and really the flow of money coming into the space, you're starting slowly but surely to see more and more mainstream companies take a peek. At the end of the day, it's the business is about the dollar, right? So Taco Bell has the Munchie Box. Chipotle, their burrito is the best thing you've rolled all day. So there's innuendos that have slowly but surely begun to come into the space from a mainstream perspective, which I think sort of defines why it's become, a little bit more accepted, which is a far cry from what it was 3 years ago.
Yeah, from a legal perspective, similar to you, and I've been, in this industry for 3 years now. 3 years ago, we're sitting on a panel here in Florida. I was saying the same thing everybody else was saying 3 years ago. What industry? Where is it? It's a pipe dream. But we started going out west, where we saw, markets were starting to develop, and we saw the opportunity. But the participants back there were a little different to what we're seeing now. Just from a legal perspective, we were interviewing attorneys. Most of the attorneys that got into the business side of the space were formerly criminal attorneys, because, prior to a certain time point, these were their clients that were doing it illegally. So now they're transitioning into the legal aspect. So it's been a challenge for us finding the right talent back then. This market moves very rapidly. 3 years in this space it feels like a lot longer than that, because so much happened in the last 3 years, and we're seeing, especially here on the East Coast, I mean, this is a serious business, serious companies, serious players, and serious money coming into this space. or actually in this space, not coming in.
Yeah, for us, when we launched 3 years ago, certainly we understood how big the market was then and where it's going to be, but also a ton of regulatory risk, which you have to really add on to execution risk, because any of these startups out here are going to have a ton of execution risk, and then just adding the other layer of regulatory uncertainty and on the federal level. And then you kind of, like for us, we looked at the industry of all passionate young entrepreneurs that are getting into this industry, if you're not growing and doing kind of the stuff that we do in tech and data and the ancillary businesses, and they need help. They need human capital aside from capital. And for us, it wasn't our first rodeo, it was our first rodeo in cannabis, so we try to lean into our experiences in other industries and bring that to the cannabis world and really guide companies. We just look at it as a new asset class that is not going away. And we want to be in it, and we're doing it full time, and we're spending a lot of time and capital doing it.
So on that point, cannabis is a global industry. And so from each of your perspectives, where do you see Florida playing a role in that, and what can we sort of anticipate in the next 3 years on Florida?
I guess I'll start being a Florida attorney. Well, I think what I'm seeing, and I especially saw this when I flew internationally for a cannabis conference last year, is Florida, like all the other states, or our country for that matter, is lagging behind. We're seeing Canada being really the first big mover in this space, and they're capturing and capitalizing on a lot of opportunities that we're just quite frankly missing out on because it's still federally illegal. Within the United States, Florida is still, lagging behind other states. There's parts of the state that are more conservative than others. But what we've seen in Florida is the growth of a small amount of market participants, but the ability to participate in this market is very valuable. So we're seeing a very small industry of, a couple dozen companies that will be very large companies that are operating in this space. And this space in Florida, we're dealing with, potentially $1 billion market. It's probably in a couple $100 million right now market, and it's a very desirable space to be participating in.
Yeah, but Florida certainly has its challenges, as Matt spoke about. But right now, the market is certainly driven by, it's a medical market, so it's driven by physician participation. So you have to have a medical card to get cannabis. So the doctors also have to really bite off on treating patients and getting patients well and using it as another source of medicine. If you look at the metrics and as far as how big the market is in Florida, it could be one of the top 5 states. Right now, I think it's surpassed New York as far as patient count, maybe tripled it, and that market has been robust, or certainly out there, for 3 to 4 years longer than Florida. Florida has all the attributes, and for on the medicine side, aging population, and a lot of doctors treating patients, and I believe that they will treat them more with cannabis. A lot of doctors are getting off the opioids, certainly a big problem with Florida, and giving up that license to prescribe opioids and recommending cannabis as an alternative.
Yeah, for us, it's really what type of product and content that we can bring to the community to sort of educate, I think that's a big area. What we have seen since Florida became legal is we have seen some growth in the platform, and creates a little bit more comfort. There's about 12,000 plus members of our community are actually in the state of Florida and growing every day. So I think, as it establishes itself from a social perspective, more and more on the legalization side from the recreational, and more of the benefits medically continue to come out and to show the value of the cannabis space, I think Florida itself will, continue, to grow in terms of like the legalization and different things. Just people get more and more comfortable. But despite everything, in the States, Florida is our 7th largest market in the country. So, it's sort of interesting.
And so, what you mentioned earlier about pivoting and just sort of being early on in the industry, I'd like to just focus from your perspective for a minute, Darren, as an operator. One of the things that we certainly see is a lot of businesses create these contingencies because of the regulation. So, for example, they can't have a bank account, so they create all these workarounds for, repatriating cash and things like that. What do you think about for the next 3 years, and what contingencies are you building into your business that will anticipate changes in the industry?
Well, I think for us, our plan, our path, is really feeling confident that the industry as a whole is only going to continue to grow. I mean, you Google the growth of the cannabis industry, and not to put any value on it whatsoever, but it looks, that it's going to grow significantly. Because of that, we need to evolve from a technology perspective. Right now, we are developing artificial intelligence and machine learning system that will be able to really provide content and products specifically to our community. So we'll be able to really add value to them and to really understand the behaviors. And really just to continue to, from my perspective, more evolving on the business side, and really to sort of see as legalization spreads, what the different markets are, how you can get your brand out there a little bit more, different ways to partner with other companies. And I think as it continues to grow, it's amazing a lot of the different people and meetings that I've met over the years, that you do have this mainstream mentality on the business side that is almost, they're like ready to jump in, but they're sort of handcuffed to their desk just because they can't yet. So I think just continuing up those relationships and those networking opportunities and things like that are what's critical. And then from our perspective too, in the continuation, we have a lot of user data, user surveys. We interact with our users all the time. What are some of the things that they like to see? What are some of the improvements that can be made? So staying in those aspects. Clearly, federally, if it should get to a point where it becomes legal, then obviously that will open up even more comfort, for everyone. So just keeping your finger on the pulse, understanding your community, and evolving.
So Brett, when you think about investing in your portfolio companies and a management team, and you look at sort of two sides of the equation, there's just general best practices as an early stage entrepreneur, then there's the dynamics of cannabis. How does that inform your process and your investment decisions, and how do you look at guys like Darren?
For us, it's people. It's always been people. Business 101 for us out of cannabis was always betting on management teams. If it's a startup, we would like to see some differentiating IP. Most of the companies we've invested in are pre-revenue or small revenue, and are just building out the team. We really spend a lot of time on diligence on the management team, getting the vision of the founders, but also really helping them guide through the regulatory, but also execution risk, and knowing that they have a real partner. When we invest in companies, they're private, so there's long-term for exit other than strategic require or go public strategy. So we become partners in these ventures. So we stick with the winners, and we really have our own contingency plan as far as preservation of capital and looking at the industries that we believe are needed in the industry to really power that. And in a nascent industry, only let's say 3 years old, or maybe longer in the legal industry, but not much, there's still leaders that might get knocked off. So when we've invested in a lot of these companies, there's capital expenditures, but we're not growing, so we're not building a big capex. So I think that's where it'll be tough to pivot. If you build an indoor warehouse growing, 100,000 square feet of indoor marijuana grow, that's tough to kind of pivot if the market's not there and when you're feeling price compression. For us, we believe we've been playing in these mission critical arenas that are going to power the business and keep the business more compliant and effective and efficient. And again, like I said at the beginning, for us it's all about people. So, Darren is a seasoned entrepreneur out of cannabis that kind of leaned into cannabis but sees the market opportunity. and took that market, a social network, to bring into Canada. So those are the kind of things that we look for. But again, it's really down to people.
So Matt, when we're talking about some of the transactions and things that are happening in the space, making investments or companies, what are you seeing from a structure standpoint? Are there certain things that are becoming unique and specific to cannabis ventures as it relates to investment or M&A?
Yeah, there's a huge trend going on right now. A lot of these U.S. companies are seeking to go public on the Canadian Securities Exchange. About half of the licensed companies in Florida right now are either currently listed, or intend to be listed. That seems to be the trend. A lot of these multi-state operators are, that are just acquiring assets, and then, going public on the Canadian exchange. It seems to be a huge trend in the market right now.
Can you expand a little more on the state of the licenses in Florida and how that's being defined?
Yeah, so Florida is unique to any other state with their licensing structure. I previously touched upon it earlier. There's not a lot of licenses in the market, but what you can do with your license is unlike any other state. So there's really no restrictions. First, one license allows you to grow, process, and dispense. There's no limit on cultivating and processing. So if you have a ticket into the market, a license, you can grow and manufacture as much as you can sell into the market. There's no restrictions there. And for dispensing, you're allowed, initially it was 25 stores per license. That's up to 30 now, and then by April 2020, there will be no restrictions essentially on a license. So what we're seeing now is a lot of bigger players, multi-state operators that have gone public in Canada. They've all targeted the Florida market because it's the combination of the huge potential patient base, the growing numbers, and the limited licenses and what you can do with that license has made it very appealing for very large players to come into this space. So we're seeing, just for the value of that license in Florida, we're looking at about $50 million just to get into the market. For some of the companies that have, established, a name and locations already, I wouldn't be surprised if that valuation is double or triple.
So that's the license alone, or trading it, or in theory?
Yeah, start companies that haven't even commenced business yet are flipping their licenses to Canadian, publicly listed Canadian companies for $50+ million right now.
And what about access to the licenses? How are they being assigned?
So the licenses that were granted currently were through our old program, our old CBD law program. They were grandfathered in, and if you lost, you were granted a license if you fell within certain points. There's a limited amount of additional licenses that are being issued through the state through a competitive application process that is currently being delayed right now. So we'll see another 7. There's 14 licenses currently issued. We'll see another 7 licenses being issued within the next year, and then for every 100,000 patients, we see another 4 more licenses. So there's very limited growth to the amount of licenses in this market, which is again very appealing for companies that want to get into the space.
And so, Darren, your business doesn't require licensure, right, to operate. So how do you look at the opportunities outside of the licensure and the direct, that don't touch the plant, from the data standpoint, technology, and innovation?
Yeah, for us, it's exactly just because there's no licensing requirements. Clearly, we have very detailed terms and conditions and different things on that front. But just like anything else, I mean, our goal is to really grow the community. We have a lot of data that we are collecting that we're able to use to basically provide our community with some good opportunities on the content, like I mentioned earlier. But really innovating on the technology side, continuing to grow outside of the cannabis space. For what we're doing, we're able to integrate that and bring it in, which is why we're really excited over the next couple months about our machine learning and artificial intelligence integration. Really as well, it's like, one of the things that Brett mentioned about the, people, and is that, there's been some really, really intelligent and very highly successful people that have come into the cannabis space as well. And being able to learn more about and partner with, whether it's on the data side or growing the community or being able to come together and to make your company and your brand a little bit stronger. So we'll continue to innovate, and grow. And the capital at times, does become, challenging being in the space, sort of that we're in. So our focus is really being able to take every dollar and make sure that it maximizes, the growth and the value of the company and the value of the user experience. But, as things continue to grow, we're also able to go ahead and really provide, whether it's state specific on the Florida side or whether you're in California, and different things that should be that are involved in those particular state, if you will. We just want to be able to bring as much information to them at the right time.
That makes sense. So let's open it up for some questions. I know this is an industry that a lot of people have a lot of curiosity about. So there's microphones just in the center if you'd like to use, or just speak up and I'll repeat the question, whatever you're more comfortable with.
Yeah.
Hey.
My question is, how do you correct state will allow it all, state will allow that role, state will allow that. So the question then becomes, what you're exactly looking for, something that we're maybe doing it on a municipal level, then has the ability to transition to the recreational level. So I'm guessing the product itself is the same for recreational.
Right. Again, for us, it's really the people. We look at the market as a whole and then pick where we think the pain points is or things that are maybe disruptive. So when we kind of curated the first portfolio and went after target companies, we picked mission critical companies or subsectors in cannabis that were going to be important. So our first investment was lab testing. Lab testing is not going away. It's regulated in every single state. You have to test the product to make sure for potency, for pesticides, and then we use that to kind of expand the portfolio in other states. That business is scalable. You can test in Florida. You can't ship cannabis over the state, but you have to open up a lab in Florida. And if someone looked at kind of outside from the portfolio, looking in now where we have this, we believe, a bespoke curated portfolio, it's data. So what Darren is talking about, it's for us, the business is going to be about data-driven. It's not going to be about science. I mean, it's going to be about science, but it's not going to be about art and feeling, about growing. It's going to be about data. So we've invested in a retail analytics company that they use in retail analytics that matches brands to dispensaries. So if the business gets larger as far as the recreational market goes, that obviously exponentially would put more value in the portfolio and more also pressure on the companies to grow. But then you'll also have mainstream companies coming in, and hopefully they'll kind of see what we've done and the companies we invested in, and either buy them or partner with them.
Short answer is none. You can't export out of the U.S. It's illegal to import or export out of the U.S., but Canadian companies are exporting to a lot of countries throughout the world. So these licensed producers there, they have license agreements with, Germany is using Canadian companies to supply their medical marijuana program. So we're seeing import-export outside of the U.S. going on, just we're missing out because of the federal illegality. It's not if, but when, in my opinion, and that when is a big question mark. But I think it'll be sooner, in my opinion, it'll be sooner than people think.
I think you'll see before exporting is interstate, shipping cannabis from outdoor grows in California to Florida before maybe you would see, exporting.
Can you just speak up or something?
There's a lot of security threats
I think it's a gray area.
It is. That's we can talk for 3 hours just on that issue alone. It's a very gray area, and what's interesting about that space, or not interesting, is things, since it's very gray, things happen on a dime that changes, positions from either a federal or state level. I don't know if you are familiar. California just came out a couple weeks ago and said CBD infused food products are illegal in the state of California. I had a client that was looking at a beverage, a CBD infused beverage company. They were doing some due diligence. They came to us to see, what the status is there. And then sure enough, a couple days later, California Department of Health issued that policy statement. So that is a very gray market, and it's very unregulated. Believe it or not, I'm more comfortable operating in the cannabis space because I know what you can and can't do. The CBD space, there's some risk of uncertainty.
Sure. Hi, as an early stage investor in this space, I have kind of two fears, maybe more fears, but two that I wanted to ask about were availability of larger amounts of later stage capital as companies grow and keep them growing, allowing them to scale. And then just the slowdown of companies' progress based on the regulatory environment. I'm wondering if you've seen improvement in the last couple of years and what your outlook is on both of those.
On the investing point, I've seen a ton of influx of capital. A lot more. Before, most of the money was family and friends and seed rounds, and now as the business kind of gets normalized or larger, the companies ask are going to be a lot greater. And there are transfer of talent running these companies, but also we're seeing a lot of co-investors for us that we would have never seen before 3 years ago. Maybe it's because we're not touching the plan, but the people that are touching the plan, they're going public and have $2 to $3 billion market caps. And I would say probably once a month in Canada, hundreds of millions of dollars are going. A company just went public this week and raised, $200 million. And that spigot is not shutting off. If you look at the growth of the product and also the industry, it's probably right next to alcohol. And as far as the industry growing and job growth and job creation, the capital's there's not a lack of capital. There's going to be a lack of good companies to invest in.
We're also seeing as well, Brett, that, and to answer your question, sort of some of the upstream, more institutional investors, our investor base are all sort of family offices, so we would co-invest with Brett and his fund, right? But I have a lot of relationships with more larger institutional private equity groups, and really en masse, they're all saying it's not if we're going to go in the industry, it's just when. And it's going to take them 3 to 4 years to change their governance between their LPs and their funds. So part of our investment thesis is that in the next 5 to 7 years, there will be a lot of institutional private equity capital looking for M&A opportunities and strategic investments where that, to your point, handcuffed to the desk, there's probably going to be a lot of pent-up capital looking for companies that are on their base doing a couple $100 million in revenue, 10 to 20 million in EBITDA, institutional like what they're used to seeing. So I think downstream there's a tremendous opportunity with private equity. Sure, Sam.
So there's certain states like Colorado working pretty and safe harbor. Florida,
On the payment, let's say, solution side.
The question was about treasury and cash management and whether or not there's emerging banks or credit unions that are going to actually provide more traditional banking capabilities and lines of credit, checking accounts, things like that, that the whole sector of this industry are just not able to get access to.
Yeah, the business is, it is federally illegal. So, Visa, MasterCard are really not being used and running on an FDIC rail. So, as you said, Seth, money's being deposited in state chartered banks or credit unions. The can-pay kind of thing, I'm a little familiar with, but it's really just a tool. So there's not a solution right now. There's cool tools that you could capture a check on your phone that you would do with Bank of America, but I think down the road, banks will open up and start taking deposits. They have to. I mean, the business will get normalized. They'll tax higher. Right now, cash management, people are fine. We sit here as investors in Florida, looking at a global industry or certainly a countrywide industry, and believe that payments are a pain point, and they are. But the business goes along. In California, people are kindly finding places to deposit cash. Other states in Oregon, we've heard of like a sovereign bank coming from on an Indian reservation, maybe thinking about doing stuff like that. But right now, there's workarounds and they're making it happen. But obviously, as the business gets normalized, I believe that these banks will start taking deposits.
Any other questions? Did you have a follow-on question, sir?
Right. Yeah, the industry is no different than an early moving industry that's kind of has hyper growth, let's say internet media, things like that. So, in Canada, most of the money is being raised on like what's going to happen in the future down the road. So they're taking how big they can get as far as footprint of well, it was patient count or assumed capacity. So if you could grow 1 million square feet, and in the 1 million square feet you're selling whatever that comes into grams, and you're kind of backing in a number of what the profit is going to be, and that's how they're priced. So they're priced from anywhere from 400 times earnings to 1,000 times earnings. Kind of when the business normalizes and these companies now have to do reporting and to get analyst coverage and research, and they have to give guidance, I think you'll see a lot different kind of landscape. Right. Yes, please.
So that's another area that, the family offices and investors are very active in. That's actually one of there's a really interesting convergence between blockchain and cannabis in particular when you start to look at, the financial systems, banking, reporting, et cetera. So there's no question that those markets are converging. Yes?
Brad, I wanted to ask you if a payment system is needed for the cannabis industry that makes it easier for the consumer or the smoker or the patient to pay at the point of sale and then convert that into a digital currency for the dispensary that they can then use to pay for supplies and products and things that they need.
Are you asking if that's needed or if it's out there?
Both. Is it out there? And if
Don't
not,
know.
is it needed?
I can comment if it's needed. Like I said, I think people kind of figured it out. You know, people buy and sell cannabis every day in all states, so there is that transaction, and most of the people kind of figured out how to do it. I couldn't comment on like, I guess what you're saying, like a stored value, loyalty, or kind of currency. For us, I don't know.
I was saying an easy way for consumers to pay with a credit card or a debit card when that dispensary or that shop is unable to accept that and can only accept cash.
So it's like a stored value, what you're saying? Or like closed loop?
Closed loop platform, right, for
Yeah,
payment.
I think they exist. I do. Right.
Hi, Brett. This question's for you. I had a chance to look through your portfolio. By the way, fantastic portfolio. I'm really impressed. I'd like to have another conversation with
It's
you.
early, but
Well, I noticed that
humble.
you're in the picks and shovels business and not so much in the production business, which I think is really smart. I'm a software guy. I'm not necessarily a cannabis guy. I don't mean any offense to anybody here, but my question was, what
My mother would think I'm a
challenges?
cannabis guy.
Oh, there you go. What challenges do you think could be solved by software right now in the industry? And not necessarily specific to Florida, but what are some big challenges that you see and maybe opportunities for entrepreneurs in the software business?
Well, certainly the tech, let's say, the business is going, stuff like Darren is doing to us is going to be, data driven. So the software applications, we invested in a company that does ordering ahead, loyalty, and also another company that matches, like I said, consumers, dispensaries to brands. But it's all software driven. We've invested in a seed to sale tracking company, which is not new to the investing world, because they do it in oranges and orange juice, as they track cannabis from seed to sale. But it's all software driven. There's going to be ERP companies. A couple of companies that we believe are takeouts for the current portfolio. We invest in the back office human resource company that does payroll management, stuff like that. So we believe a software company like AVP or Ultimate Software, which is based here, is a company that will acquire them. One of the companies we invested in, they called the Amazon of cannabis, and another company we invested in kind of mirrors the Salesforce of cannabis. So they're all kind of looking at this industry and going to lean in, and hopefully that we've invested in the companies that they'll take out.
I don't want to take up too much of your time. What's the lifespan of your fund? What's your...
The first fund is 3 years old, and it says a 10-year lifespan. We just launched a second fund.
You say like,
I'm not saying that.
So, Amazon, Salesforce, and anything you can compare to the idea for them to be acquired by those companies, get bigger, space, right? So it's
Right.
like they have a direction, and what's clear because they actually were acquired.
Right. I mean, one of the largest players in cannabis business right now is Scotts Miracle-Gro. A public company, SMG, a couple of $1 billion market cap. I sat in an analyst meeting that they had in Boca Raton next to large hedge fund advisors from Putnam to Fidelity to Blackstone, and the president of the company saw my tag and ran right over and said, "Oh my God, I love what you're doing." And people thought that we were crazy getting into the industry. And their mindset and thesis is that they own a category, in Home Depot or Home Center, as they own that category. So everything that you see in end cap to fertilizer to Roundup to anything they sell is Scotts Miracle-Gro. So they're just looking at a new vertical that is untapped, and they don't believe that, in their mind, again, that there's going to be enough more Home Depots to build, so it's not going to win on volume. So they've invested about $500 to $600 million in cannabis space. They lost a few directors, and they lost a few large hedge funds that maybe had vice clauses in to invest, but you know, the company is still around, the stock is doing well, and they're building wealth for their shareholders, and they're just taking this new vertical. So they, like I said, invested $500 million in hydroponic companies, lighting companies, and other ag tech companies in and around cannabis.
Great, as we have time for one more question, if there's anybody else out there that has something, and if not, then maybe each of you would like to just give a closing thought to the entrepreneurs and people looking at a new industry at the conference here today.
People looking at the industry, I would do your homework about size of market and obviously what problems you're going to solve or where you believe that there's going to be an inflection between what you're doing and what's not being done. And you know, build your team first and don't worry about, like, you know, raising the capital and doing certain fundings to get there. To us, again, just build your team, have a good product, service, technology that's going to make the business more efficient, effective, and compliant. Again, in our world, as far as the ecosystem or ancillary space, and just be diligent.
Yeah, I would say educate yourself and surround yourself with people, you know, you trust that, you know, could be informative or have some experience and that are not trying to sell you, but have, you know, market knowledge like these panelists here. And then when the time's right, call me and then we can work together.
So the punchline is hire good lawyers.
I would say, you know, I look at, as an entrepreneur, I look at opportunity and growth. And I think to be able to be innovative in an industry that is really at its infancy stage is something that comes around very infrequently. So I think taking a lot of that intelligence and those opportunities and be really innovative and be a part of something that just doesn't have a long history to it is really exciting. So just like any other business, diligent, head down, go, look at what the market opportunities present themselves, but then very clearly based on where we are federally speaking from the legalization, definitely focus on really making sure that what you're doing aligns with what the laws are, whether it's within the plant, whether it's ancillary.
Excellent. Well, guys, it was a pleasure being on such a great panel today. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.